Currently the Associate Director of the University of Wyoming Agriculture Experiment Station, Director of the James C. Hageman Sustainable Agriculture Research and Extension Center, and the Science Coordinator of the Sustainable Rangelands Roundtable, and a Professor in Ecosystem Science and Management focusing on rangeland economics and sustainability. He has a BS and MS in Rangeland Resources from Oregon State University and a PhD in Range Science, Range Economics from Utah State University. He was a rangeland economist with Oregon State University and research scientist at OSU Eastern Oregon Agriculture Research Centers focusing on sustainable ranching. He came to the University of Wyoming as the department head of Ecosystem Science and Management, Rangeland Ecology and Watershed Management, Soil Science and Entomology. He was the president and interim executive vice president for the Society for Range Management. He has held appointments in teaching, research, extension, and administration throughout his career. Most of his research and extension activities have focused on public land ranching, policy impacts on ranches, rangeland and ranch sustainability, and rangeland ecosystem services with particular attention to the integrating economics, sociology, and ecology. Please help me welcome Dr. John Tanaka.
Thanks, Leanne. I didn't know you were going to read the whole thing. Okay, so I think Jay asked you, how many went to the workshop last summer at Buffalo. And after that, I went to it, and afterwards I talked to Leanne a little bit and said, well, you kind of missed the economics part of that, so here I am talking about it now. Economics is often called the dismal science, and I'm going to be pretty dismal here today, but I'm going to try to build on what everyone else has talked about a little bit and talk about, what does this mean to you as ranchers, or what should it mean to you as ranchers as you listen to all this soil health talk that's going on. I'll start out, this is just an image that I pulled out of a publication a while ago. You don't have to read the whole thing. But the main point is, they start over here with kind of things that people want from the ecosystem and move to the right. Notice all these arrows are pointing this way towards the soil. As Leanne said, I got my degrees in range, and then when I switched over to economics, it's like a 180-degree turn, different way of looking at the world. And so that's what I'm going to do with most of this talk is try to turn those arrows back the other way. And so what I think about when we've got into this soil health on rangelands is, what does this mean in terms of forage productivity, quality, those kinds of things? What does soil erosion mean to you? And then how does that translate into the effects on the ranch or on livestock, or on your whole business, or on everything you want to do with the piece of property you manage? I'll say there's very little research available that looks at economics of soil health, on rangelands especially. I'd say there's maybe even less on the impacts of soil health on livestock production and those kinds of things as well. Most of the soil health information that Marlon was talking about and others have been talking about has been developed mostly on croplands. And I'd say mostly on croplands in the Midwest. And so I think people are, researchers, especially as NRCS have gotten involved in this and promoting it, are starting to look at it a lot more. It's going to be a long-term proposal to get the science-based information I think we need. So most of the information you're going to get on rangelands is probably anecdotal. Stop working. You want me to stop?
No, keep going.
Okay.
Just talk loud.
I'll go back here by the camera so they can.
Yeah.
And so it's mostly going to be anecdotal information that you hear that people have been talking about even today. Does forage production improve due to factors like soil structure, more organic matter, better nutrient cycles, microbial populations? you know, what you've heard today is, yeah, it does, but again, that's mostly anecdotal from the rangelands. We know what happens on croplands when you can manage all those different factors in there. From an economic standpoint, the questions I always ask, again, turning that first image back around the other way, is if I can improve soil structure by whatever %, what does that mean in terms of forage production? I don't know if Jake can answer that, or anyone. You know, if you improve soil health, can you change the length of the grazing season? I don't think, looking around, Mark's not here, but after the tour out on his place this summer, and we were talking about soil health out there, he pulled me aside and said, well, what it really means to us is we feed 2 months less of hay. I said, why did you say that in front of everyone? Because that, you know, if you're working on soil health and you can change that, you can reduce that pretty big cost of raising your cattle, that means something to a manager, I would assume. You want to cut the costs and you still maintain your production. If you improve soil health, you improve drought resilience. Some of the speakers earlier today talked about that. We've done some work down in Texas on ranches where the ranchers really looking at soil health and maintaining the vegetation. When they, remember that big drought a few years ago that they had down there that lasted multiple years, he still had forage on his place and his neighbors were like the carpet in here. So managing differently, if you can figure out how to do that. If you change the microbial population, what we heard about this morning, does that mean you're going to change the forage quality or quantity? We don't know these things. I mean, we can talk about them. Maybe someone knows those sorts of relationships. And it kind of comes to the question that one of the producers on the tour this summer said, well, unless this means something to me in making management decisions, I'm not sure what I can do with this information. So that's why I'm a business science person. And what the other question I ask a lot, and Holly Dyer in the back can attest to it, is, so what does this look like over time? If I improve soil health, or if I change my management to improve soil health, how long does it take? What does it look like? We asked that of the NRCS soil scientists when we started Holly's projects and some others, and they kind of all hemmed and hawed and looked at each other and said, well, we don't know. You know, because we're not doing it in a cropland system with lots of inputs and how you can change management really quickly. We can't put irrigation water on millions of acres of rangeland and have things happen that quickly. So what we do in economics, or what I've been doing in economics and grad students, or using a model of a ranch to look at how these sorts of management changes can affect the bottom line. And I'll talk a little bit about it. It's a profit maximizing model. Done a lot of other research that says ranchers aren't profit maximizers. We know that. Lifestyles probably might be more important, but I always say most people that are in business prefer more money to less. And so the models give us an indication of changes that could occur that would benefit the net value of the ranch. So the model itself seeks to maximize a stream of income over, in some cases, 25, 40, 100 years. We've done all kinds of different lengths. And we call it a recursive model because the results from this year feed in next year. So your herd size that you end this year with is what you start with next year. Shouldn't be a big surprise. But it also does things like requires you, if you have to reduce herd size because of some impact, we don't just let the model go out and magically buy new cattle to increase the herd size. It has to build a herd just like you do through retaining heifers. And so it tries to simulate what actually goes on out in the world. That's usually what we do is... Pardon? She was testing the mic from outside. Where's that voice coming from?
Sorry about that.
Okay. So usually what we do with these models, we develop a baseline. So it tries to look at what's typically done on a ranch operation. And then we impose these different scenarios on here. And the one, okay, so basically the way the model works is all those things that the speakers earlier were talking about, these variables and how they're related to each other are modeled in the model. I thought about putting up a whole bunch of equations, but you know, since I'm an economist, I thought I'd better not do that. So those relationships result in outputs and impacts. The number of calves that you can sell, the hay you can sell, how much hay is produced, all of those kinds of things are built into it. And again, it starts in 1 year, whatever these outputs and impacts are in the first year affect what happens in the second year. Just a little more detail, how it works, all the different components of the model are in here. These transfers from T-1, that's actually what happened last year, that's what happens this year again. And so it's based on the premise that you produce so much forage in each season of the year, and your livestock herd changes through the year, and you have to balance the two out and it seeks to optimize that. Builds in all the sales you do, cash sources, could be have some off-ranch